Hello YouTube, Gorod Radio Moscow here again with another beer review for you as is usual. I have another Heidelberg beer for you today, so we're continuing on with a series of German beer reviews, and in the last 2 or 3 reviews I've done from this brewery I've mentioned this beer to you, and I'm actually quite excited to do the review for this guy today. So today we're going to have a little look at the Heidelberger Brauerei and the 1603 Pilsener beer, and as I've mentioned in the last videos, this guy is brewed to an even stricter code than the German Reinheitsgebot of 1516, so we'll have a look at that and see what we think about it. So as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll take you through a brief history of the brewery, but as I always say, if you are simply just interested in the tasting of this beer, then feel free to go on towards the latter part of the video and you will catch that particular segment. And if you are also interested, the links to my other Heidelberger brewery reviews are in the video description, as is the link to the brewery website itself. So as I mentioned, many of you will have heard of the Reinheitsgebot of 1516, which is the strict code by which most German beer is brewed, and in Heidelberg there is actually an even stricter code that was introduced in the year 1603, and it's actually, there's further regulation on the actual brewing process and on the raw materials, and this was 150 years after the introduction of this law in the year 1753. The Heidelberger Brauerei was born, but by the year 1816 there were apparently a total of 38 different breweries operating in Heidelberg, of various different scales obviously, but the original property of the Heidelberg brewery changed many times, and it was continually growing over this period as well, and it was taken over by the Kleinlein brothers in the year 1820, and at that time the property was called the Kleinlein, and it actually consisted of a residential house, a 3-storey brewery, a steam engine, a refrigerated ship for the river, a stables, a malts house, and also a rock cellar where they would store the beer. But at this time they were only brewing beer from September through till May, and the extra production was actually embedded in the rock cellars with ice from the Neckar and also from the Castle Pond, and they would store this excess production until the summer when they would sell it again. But back in these early days, all of the hops and ingredients were locally cultivated, and the brewers actually had to rely on experience and observations to get the brew to come out correctly. But in 1870 the brothers bought another property in Bergstrasse, which is number 91 today, and there they built a brand new brewery which became the main base of the Heidelberger Brewery. But the secret of their success was apparently brewing a light beer in the Viennese style, although unfortunately the brothers actually struggled with the finances of the brewery, having built such a sort of costly facility, and they actually ended up selling the brewery to engineer Louis Scholl, and the brewery was actually then renamed Heidelberger Brauerei Kleinlein Heidelberg. But Karl Kleinlein, one of the Kleinlein brothers, actually remained as the brewmaster and as a board member until the year 1897. But by 1900 only 6 of the Heidelberg breweries remained, and this was the Kleinlein, Schrudel, Angels, Golden Keg, Crown, and also the Ziegler. And over the following 20 years many of these breweries were actually bought over or actually shut down, and so by 1920 it was only the Heidelberg Brauerei and the Angels brewery that were left. But the progress of the Heidelberger Brauerei over this period was, however, non-stop. In the year 1897 they appointed their first ice cream maker, and as I've mentioned before, this is an odd thing in Germany that they like to point out in their histories. If they had an ice cream maker, it actually seems to be a bit of a big deal for the brewery in terms of their history. But in 1912 they purchased their first motor cars for beer deliveries, and they also set up their new steam engines within the brewery that year as well. But by this time the Brauerei was one of the largest breweries in Baden, and actually the leading local brewery within the city of Heidelberg. Now in 1914 Heidelberger used the castle image for their trademark for the very first time, and this has stayed with the brewery despite numerous changes in ownership. But the brewery changed hands once again in 1934, and then again in 1968 when it was brought over by the Schultheiss brewery from Berlin, and this signalled the end of independence. But the brewery was however allowed to continue to operate in Heidelberg, and in 1985 the brewery was actually renamed Heidelberg Kasselbrauerei AG, and as I mentioned before, AG is a sort of German suffix similar to incorporated or limited that you would get in America or in the Great Britain respectively. But then it was finally acquired by Werner Kindermann, and then it joined his restaurant chain in the year 1985 also. But in 2005 the brewery was actually taken over by Michael Mack, and then it became the Heidelberger Brauerei, and apparently it's one of the few existing private breweries and the oldest surviving brewery in the city of Heidelberg here, and he has actually steered the brewery in the direction of of environmental sustainability and sustainable economic and business growth. But today they actually brew it in the Pfaffengrund district of a very modern facility in Heidelberg, and they use all raw materials from the local region. So that's your brief history of the Heidelberger Brewery there. But just to list the other beers that you can get from the Heidelberger Brewery, obviously there's the 1603 here, which, as I mentioned, is brewed to the Heidelberg beer order. There's an alcohol-free variety of this one as well. So you can get the premium export, you can get the Crystalweizen, Dunkelweizen, Hefeweizen, Helles. As I've mentioned before, all three of the common Hefeweizen type of beers in Germany. The Dunkel one here is actually quite nice. You can get the Original, which I've reviewed for you already, the Pils, the Dunkel, the Naturtrub, which is a Keller beer, the Lenzenbock, and also the Winter beer, and you can get the Bock Drauf as well, which is the other one that I've reviewed for you already. So I'll just let you have a little look at the bottle and cap of this beer, and this is one thing that's quite unusual for Germany, is the fact that this is actually a brown bottle rather than a green bottle. It's only the sort of some of the macro beers that will put their beers in the green bottles, like Welde and stuff like that, the beers that are sort of aimed at young people, if you like. So here you can see it's a very typical label for the Heidelberg, the white with the red sort of flash going across it. You can see it says there 1603 Pilsner beer. It's got a unique bottle cap to it there, so the 1603 one. So if you're collecting your bottle caps, this is maybe one for you to go for, considering it's very special and the fact that it's brewed in accordance with a kind of ancient brewing law. And here is the top label, of course, on this guy as well. And this guy is best by the 4th. It says apparently it's best by the 4th of March 2014, so it's a little bit out of date, but they were still selling this in the supermarket, so I'm not sure. We might get a little bit of a skunky taste off of this guy when we open it up, but we'll find out soon enough. I'll just get this guy open and we can get on with the tasting here. This guy is 4.8% a Pilsner beer, and as I mentioned, it's brewed in accordance with the Heidelberg beer order, and there's stricter regulations on the raw materials that they use in the beer, and there's a more gentle brewing process with this apparently. I couldn't find out too much about the Heidelberg beer order, incidentally, but I was a bit disappointed to find that I couldn't find that on the brewery website. So maybe if people from the Heidelberg Brewery are watching, it might be an interesting thing to add to your website, because I couldn't find it. So as you can see, this guy is pouring just like a nice sort of German beer there. Typical with the sort of head going out it. It smells very sort of macro-y beer as I pour it out there. You can smell it. It reminds me of some of these Polish beers actually. I think it was Lech. It actually reminds me of the smell of this guy. But you can see there, it's a nice two-fingered white head on it. It's definitely white and frothy. A little bit of bumpy character to it, I would say. As you can see when I hold the beer up in front of me there, it's completely clear if I put my fingers just behind the glass there. Very clear, pale straw looking colour, a lot of carbonation rushing up towards the head there. But in terms of the aroma with this guy, very grassy, as you would expect, very grassy, slightly grainy malts as well coming through, but predominantly a kind of a really pungent grassy aroma here with some citrus maybe in it as well, just mainly the grassy rather than the citrus though. Yeah, it really is a pungent grassy aroma with this guy, and there is perhaps some kind of herbal hoppy character to it as well. You can pick up a little bit of bread, but the main thing with this guy really is the sort of grassy character that's coming out with it. So without further ado, there's not much more of a smell to these sort of macro beers. We'll give it a taste and see how we get on. It's actually quite malty. It's a lot more malty than you would expect. The malt has quite a bit of a bite to it when you take it in. Yeah, actually, that's more of just a first taste thing. When I take the second gulp, the malt just has, it sort of calms down a little bit. Then you're getting more of the grassy hops after it. The malt and the second taste is coming out more of a sort of bready variety, if you like. It really is more sort of bready, not really a yeasty bread either, more like a sort of white bread taste in the bready malt base. But yeah, the bread character in this guy isn't actually too prominent. It's mainly dominated by the hops, in my opinion. The bready character comes in and is quite smooth, and then it disappears quite quickly to be replaced by the grassy hops. And I think there is some slight citrusy element in there as well. There's not really any grainy character that was kind of picking up in the aroma. Really is a simple sort of bready malt base that's very smooth, and then a kind of grassy hop finish at the end there. Yeah, definitely a very grassy hop finish, maybe a little bit of herbal character in there as well, but very, very faint. It really is a very grassy and hay hop taste to this guy, and as I mentioned quite a few times in fact so far, the bready malt base is very mild in this guy. It really is a grassy kind of hop forward beer. Maybe that's a result of the gentler brewing process, the fact that the sugars haven't been extracted and therefore the beer is a little less malty, but I'm not too sure about that. I'm not an expert on brewing, and maybe some other beer tubers, if you like, can actually fill you in a little bit more on that, but I think mainly this guy is a sort of grassy pilsner. I would describe the mouthfeel of this one, it's definitely a light to mid-bodied beer. It's actually quite a dry one. It's not really such a refreshing beer in honesty. The carbonation is sort of middle ground, but it does play quite a big role in the sort of grassy character of the beer, but at the same time it is very dry and it's a little thin, to be honest with you. That would be one thing if maybe they can refine the brewing process a little bit, but I guess if it's brewed in accordance with this strict order, if you like, then it's not such a flexible brewing process, if you like. But in honesty, the beer is a little bit thin. I think I've had this guy on draft before, and you do get a little bit more of the bready malts coming out in this, but maybe this guy is just a little bit out of date. But my impression of this guy is that it really is a sort of grassy pilsner more than anything, with a little bit of herbal character and just a very mild malt base. But on draft, I think you do get just a little bit more out of the bready character there, and it does turn out a little bit nicer. But maybe the green bottle doesn't help in honesty either. I always prefer when they put these things into a brown bottle, as obviously it prevents the oxidative damage of the beer. But in that case, you usually get a lot. If there is oxidative damage to the beer, you usually get a skunky taste or a sort of very, very sweet, fruity taste that can give that particular offing, but that's more common in dark beers, I would say. But I would recommend definitely a sort of brown bottle for this one. But if you do happen to have tried this beer, please let me know your own thoughts on it. As I say, my opinion of it is that it's quite a nice sort of grassy pilsner with a little bit of dry character to it. I think it could be a little fuller than it actually is, so let me know your own thoughts on this beer. I hope you found my review of it informative. I do actually quite like some of the Heidelberger Brauerei stuff. I hope I can do some of the Hefeweizen beers for you before I leave, but I'm a little bit short on time, I guess, for this sort of thing. But thanks again for your support over my 170 or so beer review videos now, and please like, subscribe, share, help my channel to grow, and I thank you again for your support, and I'll be back soon with another beer review. And please comment and let me know your own thoughts on this beer, as I said before. Cheers.